After years in Congress, I never imagined that my fiercest battle wouldn't be on the House floor, but in my own front yard. They shot my service dog, Bod, said he was lowering property values, and just like that, everything I'd built began to unravel. But when they found out who I really was, and what power I held, their carefully manicured little world came crashing down. The only question left was, would justice for Bod come at the cost of my career? I remember the day I moved into Oak Ridge Estates like it was yesterday. My dream home, with a perfect little garden and enough space for Bod to finally play freely. He was a golden retriever, trained to help me through the PTSD that never quite left after my last deployment. He'd saved my life in my darkest moments. I didn't know that garden would soon become a battlefield. The first week was peaceful. I worked remotely on housing reform bills, quietly, anonymously. That's how I liked it. Just another homeowner blending in. Bod would curl up near my desk, sensing whenever the memories crept in, anchoring me with his calm. The neighbors smiled and waved. They probably thought I was just another work-from-home professional. Then came the first note. A pink slip of paper slapped onto my front door. The writing was so angry it had torn through the page in places. Unauthorized pet. Violation of HOA codes. I actually laughed. They hadn't done their homework about service animal laws. I pulled out my phone to take a picture when I heard that voice for the first time. "You must be the new neighbor breaking our rules." The woman storming across my lawn had the look. Perfectly curled blonde hair, overpriced yoga gear, and the smugness of someone who thought the HOA gave her federal authority. "I'm Karen Hiddleston, chair of the Community Standards Committee," she declared like royalty arriving at court. I kept my voice even. Congressional debates had prepared me for worse. "Nice to meet you. I'm Jessica, and this is Bod, my service dog." I reached for his certification papers, but she was already shaking her head. "We don't allow large dogs here. They destroy property values," she sniffed. "Bob Hiddleston, our HOA president, has strict rules about this sort of thing." Karen's eyes narrowed at Bod, who sat obediently at my side. "And really, you don't look disabled." My grip on Bod's leash tightened. I wanted to shout, "Not all wounds are visible," but instead I smiled politely. "I understand your concern, but service animals are protected under federal law. I have all the documentation you need." She pulled out her phone, snapping photos of my garden, my porch, and Bod. "We'll see about that. This isn't over." Then she stormed off, her designer sneakers leaving dents in my freshly watered grass. That night I couldn't sleep. Bod stayed close, sensing my tension. I'd faced foreign governments. I'd debated billion-dollar bills. But something about Karen felt different, personal. While Bod dozed, I pulled up Oak Ridge Estates HOA regulations. I scanned them line by line. No mention of service animals. The next morning I stepped outside to find my garden fence spray-painted in blood-red letters, "Violation." My security cameras had caught it all. Karen at 6 a.m. directing a teenager with a spray can like it was a military operation. The paint was still wet. Bod's paw prints tracked red across the sidewalk. Exactly what they wanted. I was halfway through drafting an email to the HOA board when the doorbell rang. This time it was Bob Hiddleston. He held a thick folder of complaints. He didn't look at me, just stared at Bod like he was a wild animal. "Mrs. Sullivan," he began, voice syrupy, "we pride ourselves on certain standards here. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in a different neighborhood." Bod pressed against my leg, sensing the rising tide inside me. That's when I saw Karen standing on the sidewalk, phone raised, recording everything, waiting for me to snap. They had no idea who they were dealing with, or the laws they were breaking, but for now I had to play it smart. "Thank you for your concern," I said, taking the folder with my most practiced congressional smile. "I'll review these complaints carefully." Then I added as I shut the door, "By the way, does your HOA carry insurance for federal housing violations?" Bob's smile faltered. Karen stopped recording. They didn't know it yet, but they'd just started a war they couldn't win. That night, other neighbors reported property damage. Coincidentally, all on my street. My security footage caught Karen and Bob making the rounds, pointing at houses and whispering like villains in a BM movie. I had a sinking feeling. This was only the beginning. The next morning I was jolted awake by the click of a camera. Karen, in a neon pink jogging suit, was outside, photographing my front yard. Bod growled low from under the table. His ears perked. "That dog poop is ruining our property values," she shouted, spotting me through the blinds. Bod never left messes. He was trained. I'd spent over $30,000 in 2 years preparing him after my last deployment. I stepped outside and began filming her. Karen's face turned crimson. "You can't record me. This is harassment." The irony was rich. Later that day, every mailbox had a flyer. Dangerous animal in neighborhood. A grainy photo of Bod yawning on the lawn had been circled in red, like a crime scene. My cameras caught Karen's son, James, planting fake dog poop in my yard. The poor kid looked ashamed, mouthing "sorry" at the doorbell cam. The real trouble started that evening. I took Bod on our usual walk past the community garden I'd helped start last spring. Karen and Bob were already there. "She's planting unapproved vegetables," Karen shrieked, waving a ruler, "and who knows what that dog is spreading." I calmly pulled out a recording audio from the last HOA meeting approving my garden layout. Karen's face turned several shades of purple. "You're not allowed to record meetings," she howled. "Actually, I am," I replied coolly. I checked state law before moving in. That night, I smelled something off while making dinner. Bod barked, sharp, alert. I ran outside. My entire garden was dying. Someone had poured industrial-strength weed killer over the beds. The tomato plants I'd grown for the food bank were shriveling before my eyes. The cameras caught James again, in a hoodie, creeping around like a cartoon thief. I filed a police report. Officer Maria, no relation to Karen, arrived and quietly said, "You're not the only one. We've had multiple complaints about this HOA in the last month." I added it to the growing file. The next day, Karen held an emergency HOA meeting on property values. I watched from my window as neighbors streamed into her house. Mrs. Laura, my elderly neighbor, caught my eye. She shook her head and later slipped a note into my mailbox. "They're planning something big. Be careful." I forwarded clips from my cameras to an old contact at the local news, not to air yet, but just in case. Then I pulled out my congressional letterhead and started typing. But I hesitated. Was this the moment I stopped hiding who I was? That evening, a rock hit my window. Outside stood James, Karen gripping his arm, forcing him to throw another. Bod trembled under my desk from the noise. Cameras recorded everything. They had no idea the storm that was coming. And this time, I wasn't walking into that meeting as just another homeowner. I was coming as a congresswoman with a wounded service dog and a case built on truth. My entire garden was wilting. The tomato plants I'd grown for the community food bank, slush and vibrant just hours earlier, were now shriveling and blackened. Someone had dumped industrial-strength weed killer across every bed. The smell burned my nose. The cameras had caught it all. There he was, Karen Hiddleston's husband, James Thompson. Wearing a black hoodie like some cartoon villain, slipping through the shadows with a jug in hand. I called the police immediately. Officer Martinez, thankfully no relation to Karen, arrived within the hour. She took one look at the dying plants and grimaced. "We've had 7 complaints about this HOA in the past month," she said softly while snapping photos. Then she handed me her card with a meaningful look. "Add this to your file." I nodded. The next morning, Karen hosted an emergency HOA. This time it was about plummeting property values. I watched from my window as neighbors filed into her house. Some wore the blank expressions of people who just wanted peace. Others came eager for the drama. Mrs. Laura, my elderly neighbor who adored Bod, glanced up at my house and shook her head sadly. As she passed, she slipped a folded note into my mailbox. "They're planning something big. Be careful." I forwarded the latest security footage to my old friend at the local news, not to publish, just for insurance. Then I sat down at my desk, pulled out official congressional letterhead, and began drafting a federal inquiry into discriminatory housing practices. My hands shook slightly as I typed, but Bod rested his head on my knee, grounding me like always. That's when I heard the sound. A dull crack, stone hitting glass. I rushed to the window. There stood James Thompson, Karen gripping his shoulder with vice-like force. His eyes were red. He was crying. But she still made him throw another rock. It shattered my living room window. Across the street, neighbors watched from driveways, phones in hand, silently recording, no one brave enough to intervene. I grabbed my phone. Karen didn't know it yet, but tomorrow's HOA meeting wouldn't be like the others. This time, I wasn't coming as just another homeowner. But as I sat on the floor beside Bod, his body trembling from the noise, I wondered, had I waited too long to reveal who I really was? The next evening, I walked into the HOA meeting room with Bod at my side, guiding me to an open seat. Every conversation died. The room fell still. Karen's voice sliced the silence. "She's breaking the rules again, bringing that dog in here." I closed my eyes for a moment, centering myself. This wasn't Congress, but it was a battlefield. And I'd fought on tougher ones. At the front of the room stood Bob Hiddleston, HOA president, her gray blazer starched and pristine, her smile as fake as the bylaws she twisted. "We begin tonight's meeting with an urgent issue regarding unauthorized pets and property values," she announced sweetly. I felt every eye turn toward me and Bod. A few neighbors looked away, their shame evident. Karen practically leapt from her seat, waving a stack of stapled papers. "I have documented evidence of this dog urinating on my roses. My children can't even play outside anymore because of their severe allergies." I nearly laughed. Her kids had been at the community pool with Mrs. Laura's Labrador just the day before. I rose slowly, steady, and deliberate. I pulled out Bod's service animal certification and a printed copy of the Fair Housing Act. Bod is a registered service animal under federal law. "We don't care about your supposed federal laws," Karen snapped, stepping toward me. "This is a private community. We make the rules." Her face had gone beet red. "My property values have dropped 15% since you moved in." With that much, the room exploded, shouting, arguing, some defending me, others fuming about their homes being devalued. And through it all, I saw James Hiddleston in the back, phone in hand, filming everything with a smug little grin. That grin would cost him more than he could imagine. "If I may," I said, raising my voice, not yelling, just enough to cut through the chaos like I used to on the house floor. I walked to the projector, connected my laptop, and brought up the data. According to public property records, values in Oak Ridge Estates have increased 12% since I moved in. The room went quiet. I clicked to the next slide. The only recorded dip occurred after Karen Hiddleston's unauthorized pool cracked her neighbor's foundation. Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon, but I wasn't done. Also, satellite imaging from county records shows that Bob Hiddleston's newly constructed fence extends 3 feet into public land. That's why I've been cited for having Bod off-leash on what is actually not HOA property. Bob's face went pale. "This meeting is adjourned," she muttered, fumbling for her papers. Too late. Hands shot up around the room, neighbors finally emboldened, wanting to speak. Stories of fines, bullying, and petty harassment spilled into the air. Karen snapped. She stormed toward Bod, finger jabbing the air. "This dog is dangerous. Look at him, he's growling." Bod sat silently, ears alert but unmoving. "He tried to attack my Bella just yesterday." I calmly pulled out my phone and tapped play. The projector showed crystal-clear footage of Karen's tiny chihuahua, lunging through the fence slats while Bod stood calmly, stepping back to protect me. Gasps filled the room. Bob slammed her gavel. "This is unauthorized recording. You can't—" "Actually," I interrupted, voice cool. "The HOA bylaws prohibit recording private residences. Common areas, like this room? Fair game." Years of dissecting legislative fine print had finally paid off. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw James Thompson slipping out the side door, texting furiously. Bod's ears twitched. He sensed something I didn't. If only I'd paid closer attention. Karen stormed out too, screaming over her shoulder, "This isn't over! You'll regret ever moving into this neighborhood!" Her words didn't scare me. They just confirmed what I already knew. People like Karen and Bob were the exact reason I'd spent my life fighting for fair housing. As Bod and I walked home under the setting sun, I noticed several neighbors quietly removing their "No Pets Allowed" signs. Small victories. But something in the air felt off, unsettled. Bod's usual carefree gait was tight, focused. He was on alert, and I was starting to understand why. This wasn't about a dog anymore. This was about power and what happens when someone finally dares to say no. I had no idea what was waiting the next morning, but it would change everything. I awoke to birdsong and sunlight filtering through the blinds. Bod nudged my hand, our morning ritual. I smiled and stretched, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling in my chest. The grass was still wet with dew, and the sky was streaked in soft orange and pink. Perfect weather for Bod's daily training, but something was off. As we stepped into the backyard, I heard them, muffled voices, urgent and hushed. Coming from Karen's side of the fence, I tried to ignore it. We'd gotten used to the spying. Bod focused, responding to every command, his golden fur shimmering in the light. He was more than a dog. He was my protector, my lifeline. Then I heard the back door slam. "You're filming this, right, James?" Karen's shrill voice carried over the fence. "We need evidence of this nuisance." I took a breath, choosing to stay focused on Bod. We'd filed police reports, built the case. My lawyer was on standby. But Bod's body tensed. He shifted, moving between me and the fence. That only happened when he sensed danger. Footsteps crunched on dry leaves. I moved slowly, turning toward the sound. Karen was glaring through the slats, phone in hand. "You've been warned," she snapped. "This dog is a menace. Property values are dropping because of you." I pulled out my phone, ready to record whatever fabricated accusation came next. That's when James stepped out from behind the garage. He wasn't holding a phone. He was holding something cold and metallic. A weapon. My heart dropped. From Karen Hiddleston's yard, I tried to ignore it. We had gotten used to her constant spying. Bod stayed focused on his tasks, just like he was trained to do. His golden fur shimmered in the morning light as he helped me maintain balance, a daily reminder of why he was so much more than just a pet. I heard Karen's back door slam. "You're filming this, right, James?" Her shrill voice cut through the quiet. "We need evidence of this nuisance." I exhaled slowly, choosing to concentrate on Bod. We'd already filed 3 police reports for harassment. My lawyer was building a solid case. Then Bod's ears perked up. He shifted, placing his body between me and the fence, his way of telling me something was wrong. Footsteps crunched on leaves along the property line, right where Karen had spent days complaining about my garden bed. "Hey, your mud is threatening my wife." James Thompson's voice boomed from behind the fence. I turned slowly, keeping my voice level, just like I had through tense congressional hearings. "Bod is a trained service animal, James. He's not threatening anyone." Karen's face appeared over the fence, phone raised. "We've warned you about this dangerous animal. Property values are dropping because of you." Her voice cracked with the same entitled fury I'd come to expect. I reached for my phone, ready to record whatever nonsense she planned to say next. That's when I saw James step from behind the garage, holding something that made my stomach drop. Sunlight glinted off metal. A weapon. "James," I said calmly, hands raised, "think very carefully about what you're doing." Bod stayed perfectly still, his training taking over. He was doing exactly what he was supposed to. Keep me safe, stay calm. "I'm the head of neighborhood security," James shouted, red-faced. "I'm protecting this community." Karen was still filming, her smile widening. Then a neighbor's car backfired. Karen screamed, something about an attack. James' finger tensed on the trigger. I lunged for Bod. Too late. The shot cracked through the air. Bod's yelp split my world in two. My brave, gentle partner collapsed onto the grass, golden fur stained red. "Self-defense," Karen shrieked. "We all saw it. The dog was aggressive." But her voice faltered. Neighbors emerged from their homes, phones recording. No one moved. I dropped beside Bod, hands trembling but steady enough to apply pressure. His brown eyes met mine, still full of trust. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had called. I grabbed my phone and hit the emergency contact I'd hoped I'd never need. "Maria," It's Jessica, get the legal team, now. Karen gasped. She'd finally recognized my voice, the same one she'd heard on C-SPAN during last week's Housing Committee hearing. James' weapon clattered to the ground. But none of that mattered. Not Karen's frantic excuses, not James' pale face, not the flashing lights closing in. All that mattered was Bod's fading heartbeat under my palms. I lifted him carefully into the car. I made 2 promises. Bod would survive, and the people who did this would learn what happens when you cross a congresswoman and her service dog. Neighbors stood frozen in their yards as I sped toward the emergency vet. Karen and James stood stunned, sirens approaching. They wanted to fight over property values. They were about to learn the true cost. At the vet's waiting room, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Bod's blood soaked my favorite blue shirt. The ticking clock sounded like thunder. Every time the doors swung open, I braced for news. My phone buzzed. Again. Maria. I finally answered. They shot him, Maria. They actually shot Bod. Turn on the news now, she said. It's everywhere. Someone posted a video. I fumbled for my tablet, heart pounding. The first clip Maria sent showed shaky footage from a neighbor's second-stream window. James with the gun, Karen screaming about property values, Bod's scream, 1 million views and rising. The ER doors burst open. Bob Hiddleston charged in, her designer purse swinging wildly, her perfectly painted face now pale, mascara smeared. "You're her," she gasped. "You're actually her." I stood tall. "Yes." "I'm Congresswoman Jessica," she stumbled back. "You let us think you were just another homeowner." "I wanted to live quietly," I said, "to work on my housing reform bill in peace, but instead you harassed a disabled veteran and her service dog." Karen rushed in behind her, red-faced and shaking. "This is a trick. She's lying." Then she saw the news on the waiting room TV. My congressional photo beside the footage of Bod being shot. Her mouth fell open. My phone lit up with texts, members of Congress, media outlets, disability rights organizations. Justice for Bod was trending. The vet tech appeared, scrubs bloodied. "He's stable," she said. "The bullet missed vital organs, but he'll need surgery. Dr. Patterson wants to speak with you." Relief swept over me, followed by white-hot anger. I turned to Karen and Bob, now huddled near the exit. "I've been working on a housing reform bill for over a year. Today I'm adding specific provisions about service animals and HOA accountability. Your actions just became Exhibit A." Karen's face crumpled. But, our property values, our community standards." I laughed bitterly. "Check Zillow, Karen. Homes in Oak Ridge Estates are already dropping below market value." Turns out, shooting a congresswoman's service dog isn't great for real estate. Bob Hiddleston grabbed her phone, frantically scrolling through Zillow. Her gasp told me she'd seen the plummeting prices. "We can fix this," she pleaded. "We'll drop all the complaints, pay the vet bills." "It's too late," I said, pulling a folder from my briefcase. "This is what justice looks like." Inside were copies of every harassing letter they'd sent, photos of my vandalized garden, and recordings of their discriminatory HOA meetings. "The FBI is already investigating. Interfering with a service animal is a federal crime." The vet tech returned. "Ma'am, Dr. Patterson is ready for you." I gathered my things, watching Bob sink into a chair, her face buried in her hands. Karen Hiddleston remained frozen, staring at her phone as angry comments flooded the HOA's social media pages. As I reached the door to see Bob, I heard Bob whisper, "What have we done?" My hand rested on the door handle. I looked back one last time. "You tried to destroy my life and hurt my dog because you thought I was powerless. Now you're going to learn what real power looks like. The power of the law you tried so hard to ignore." The next few hours would change everything. But in that moment, all I cared about was Bod. As I stepped through the doors, I couldn't help but wonder, would saving him cost me everything I'd built in Congress, or become the defining moment of my career? Morning news vans lined our quiet street like vultures. Through my window, I watched Karen pacing her pristine front lawn in designer yoga pants, clutching her phone, shouting at reporters. Her panic was a stark contrast to her usual smug confidence. Bod's blood hadn't even dried from my back patio, and already her perfectly curated world was burning. My phone buzzed, another text from Maria. The story had reached national headlines. Congresswoman's service dog, shot by HOA board member. Social media was exploding. The security footage I'd released, clear audio of Karen screaming about property values just seconds before James Thompson pulled the trigger, was going viral. There was no spinning this. A knock rattled the front door. Bod whimpered from his bed, his bandaged side a brutal reminder of everything they had done. Through the peephole I saw Bob Hiddleston, disheveled, shaken, hands trembling. I opened the door just enough. "Congresswoman Jessica, please. We didn't know who you were. Karen was just trying to protect our community standards. James made a terrible mistake. What will it take to keep this quiet?" I felt a cold smile creep across my face. Protect community standards? Let me show you something, Bob. I opened my tablet and brought up the file my team had compiled. Here are 5 years of HOA violation notices in Oak Ridge Estates. Look closely. Notice anything strange? Bob's face drained of color as I scrolled. Every single complaint about pets, gardens, community behavior had been filed against minorities, disabled residents, or elderly homeowners. The pattern was crystal clear. "This isn't just about Bod anymore," I said. "While you were busy harassing my service dog, my office was quietly investigating HOA abuse across the country. Oak Ridge Estates just became Exhibit A." A shout from down the street drew our attention. Karen was screaming at a news reporter who dared to step onto her lawn. "You don't understand. Property values are everything. We can't have dogs running around. It attracts the wrong kind of people." The reporter's camera caught every word. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. My phone buzzed again. The housing reform bill I'd been quietly developing was now gaining massive momentum. Colleagues who'd wavered before were now calling to co-sponsor. Funny how a viral video of HOA abuse against a congresswoman's service dog could move mountains. Bob was still standing on my porch, shaking. "What do you want from us?" I handed her a thick envelope. "Here's your chance to do the right thing. It's my proposal for a complete governance overhaul. New board elections, third-party oversight, mandatory civil rights training. Sign and fund it, or I add your name and these documents to my congressional testimony next week." She snatched the envelope, but her hands shook too badly to open it. Behind her I saw James Thompson being led from his house in handcuffs. The police had finally arrived to arrest him for animal cruelty and reckless discharge of a firearm. Karen was crying into her phone, probably trying to reach her lawyer. Bod limped to my side, his tail wagging weakly as he watched it all unfold. I scratched behind his ears, thinking of all the nights he'd pulled me through PTSD attacks. How dare they try to take him from me? A new message lit up my phone, photos from a resident showing boxes of HOA documents being shredded in Bob's garage the night before. More evidence. The house of cards was collapsing. Protesters gathered at the community entrance, holding signs with Bod's face, demanding justice. Local reporters interviewed longtime residents who had been silenced. One elderly woman wept, describing near bankruptcy from fines over her wheelchair ramp. A Latino family displayed notices for offensive cooking odors tied to their cultural traditions. Bob's hands trembled as she signed the documents. "Please," she whispered. "My husband's on the city council. This will ruin us." I reviewed the signatures. "You should have thought about that before allowing your HOA to target a congresswoman and her service dog." I tucked the papers into my case. "Don't worry. You'll have plenty of time to reflect during the federal investigation." As she turned to leave, I saw Karen live on TV, trying desperately to defend herself. "I had no idea she was in Congress. We just wanted to maintain our standards. Dogs reduce property values by 15%. The reporter didn't flinch. "Ma'am, are you aware that discrimination against service animals is a federal crime, regardless of the owner's profession?" I closed my front door, sitting heavily next to Bod. My phone buzzed nonstop. Networks, senators, advocacy groups. Tomorrow I'd begin turning this nightmare into something real, something permanent. But tonight, I held Bod close, whispering, "We got them, buddy. We finally got them." Outside, another news van rolled in. I watched the blinking lights and I wondered just how many HOAs across the country were about to face their own day of reckoning. The vet said Bod would never walk the same again. but they didn't know his spirit. I watched him take his first slow steps across our living room floor. His golden fur was still patchy, but his tail wagged. The news vans had finally packed up, but the damage to Oak Ridge Estates was forever. Every time Bod flinched at a noise, my heart cracked anew. Karen Hiddleston's perfect kingdom had crumbled. I heard she'd tried to sell her house, but no one wanted to buy from the woman who helped shoot a congresswoman's service dog. The woman who helped shoot a congresswoman's service dog. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages from other representatives, senators, veterans, disability rights groups. Bod's story had struck a national nerve. Last week I caught Karen Hiddleston sneaking into my backyard, phone in hand, probably looking for more content to twist, but this time I was ready. My security system caught everything, including her planting fake dog waste near the fence. The police didn't laugh it off this time. Bob Hiddleston, our disgraced former HOA president, sent me a letter begging to meet. She wanted to make things right. I read it twice before handing it to Bod as a chew toy. Their apologies were as fake as the violations they fabricated. More homeowners came forward. Stories poured in about how Bob and Karen had targeted elderly neighbors, single parents, and minorities with made-up infractions. The media dug deeper into Oak Ridge Estates history. They found damning recordings. Karen bragging about forcing a young widow to sell her home because her crying baby was a neighborhood nuisance. Bob's emails about keeping the wrong people out were even worse. Their own words were their downfall. And then came the final nail. My team discovered that James Thompson, Bob's husband, had lied about his security credentials. He was never licensed to carry a firearm, not in any capacity. The authorities were eager to investigate. Meanwhile, Bod's physical therapy became the highlight of my week. Neighbors, some who used to avoid us, now brought him treats and walked alongside us in solidarity. Even Mrs. Jackson, who once grumbled about everything, dropped off homemade biscuits with a quiet smile. The community was healing, but not everyone was happy about it. Karen tried launching a counter-campaign on social media, claimed she was the real victim, posted doctored footage of Bod barking, but my PR team released the raw footage, showing Karen banging on the fence, waving objects to provoke him. Her followers disappeared faster than Oak Ridge Estate's property values. The most surprising support came from within her own home. Linda Martinez, Karen's teenage daughter, came by one afternoon, eyes full of tears. She apologized for her mother's behavior and confessed she'd been secretly recording HOA meetings. She'd had enough. Linda's evidence became crucial in the federal investigation. Last night, I watched Bod play with the neighbor kids for the first time since the shooting. He still limped, but his tail wagged with joy. A reporter asked if I'd drop the charges if Bob and Karen apologized. I looked at Bod, remembered the blood on his fur, the fear in his eyes, the nights of pain. Some things can't be fixed with sorry. The old HOA board office now sits empty, its rule books collecting dust. The interim resident council uncovered records showing that Bob and Karen had been funneling HOA fees into personal accounts for years. They thought they were untouchable. They never expected a congresswoman and her three-legged dog to bring them down. Tomorrow, Bod has another vet checkup. His recovery is slow, but steady. He's teaching me something new every day about resilience. As I sit on my porch watching the sunset, I see Karen loading boxes into her car. Her house finally sold at half her asking price. Sometimes karma has a poetic way of restoring balance, but as I glance at the certified letter on my desk, one sent by her lawyer, I wonder, is this fight really over? Or is Karen Hiddleston planning one last desperate move? In today's world, injustice doesn't always come from the halls of power. It can begin in your very own neighborhood. This story is more than just a battle over property values. It's about resilience, abuse of authority, and the quiet power of standing your ground. Congresswoman Jessica never expected that her greatest challenge wouldn't come from Washington, but from a corrupt HOA in the suburbs. When her service dog Bod was shot by a board member under the excuse of protecting community standards, she didn't just grieve, she fought back. What followed was a masterclass in legal accountability, exposing years of harassment, discrimination, and embezzlement. This isn't fiction, It's a chilling reminder of how unchecked power, even in small communities, can spiral into real harm. But Jessica's response also offers a lesson. Documentation matters, knowing your rights matters, and not backing down in the face of intimidation? That can change everything. So what can you do today? Know your rights under the Fair Housing Act. Stand with your neighbors, especially the vulnerable. Never underestimate what one voice, backed by truth, can accomplish. For more real stories where justice finally wins, follow and subscribe to the HOA Revenge YouTube channel, because sometimes the law limps like Bod, but it still leads.